The night was alive with the sounds of an approaching storm. Dark clouds rolled across the twilight sky of Skyla, cloaking the floating city of Elithra in a heavy shroud. Lightning danced through the distance, illuminating the horizon in brief, dazzling flashes of white, while thunder rumbled like an ancient beast, restless and powerful. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then with increasing intensity, each drop a sharp note in the symphony of the storm. Ilara stood at the grand window of her observatory, watching the storm roll in with a mixture of awe and unease. Storms were rare on Skyla, and when they did come, they brought with them an intensity that mirrored the energy of the planet itself. Skyla was a place of light, of suspended beauty, its floating cities held aloft by the mysterious power that surged beneath its surface. But there were times when that energy seemed to stir, as though the planet was reminding its inhabitants that it, too, had the power to change the course of events. The air was thick, charged with electricity. Ilara could feel it in her bones, a familiar sensation that often preceded moments of great importance. As the Ardentess of Elithra, the youngest leader to hold the title in generations, she had learned to listen to those subtle shifts in the atmosphere, to attune herself to the pulse of the planet. It had served her well in navigating the complexities of her role, but tonight that energy felt different. It hummed, not just in the air around her, but in her skin, in her heart. Something was coming. Ilara pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, her fingertips leaving faint imprints of warmth. She closed her eyes, listening to the rain as it drummed against the glass in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Beneath that sound, she could hear something else, a whisper, faint but persistent, calling to her in a voice she didn't recognize. Her heart quickened, a prickle of unease running up her spine. She opened her eyes and gazed out at the storm once more. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and for a brief moment she thought she saw something, a figure, perhaps standing on the edge of the city's platform. But it was gone in an instant, swallowed by the darkness and rain. Ilara shook her head, stepping back from the window. It was just the storm playing tricks on her. Skyla had a way of doing that, especially on nights like this. She turned away, letting out a soft sigh, and crossed the room to where her robes lay draped over a chair. She was still dressed in her ceremonial attire, having just returned from a long meeting with the council. The weight of leadership pressed down on her shoulders, as it always did, but tonight, that weight felt heavier, as though something was drawing nearer, something inevitable. As she reached for the fabric, the air in the room seemed to shift. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and Ilara froze, her hand hovering just above the robe. She felt it before she saw it, a presence, like a ripple through the energy of the room. Slowly she turned, her pulse racing, and her breath caught in her throat. A figure stood in the center of the room, illuminated by the dim light of the storm outside. The rain had turned to a steady downpour now, casting faint shadows that flickered and danced against the walls. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably foreign. His clothes were damp, clinging to his form, and his eyes, dark, intense, were fixed on her with a gaze that sent a chill down her spine. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with tension, as though the storm outside had found its way into the room. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest, and she struggled to find her voice. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flood of adrenaline rushing through her veins. The figure took a step forward, his movements deliberate, his gaze never leaving hers. "My name is Darian," he said, his voice low and rich, carrying with it the weight of something unsaid. "I come from a place far beyond this world." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her instincts flaring with a mix of caution and curiosity. Skyla was a peaceful world, isolated from the conflicts that plagued the outer systems. It had been centuries since anyone from beyond their atmosphere had set foot on its floating platforms. This stranger didn't belong here. "What do you want?" she demanded, taking a step back, her hand hovering near the hilt of her ceremonial dagger, a weapon she had never needed to use but carried out of tradition. Her fingers brushed the cool metal, offering a brief sense of security, though she doubted it would be of much use against someone who had appeared so suddenly. Darian's expression softened, and he held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm, Ilara," he said, his voice soothing but firm. "I've come because I need your help." Ilara's eyes flickered with suspicion. "How do you know my name?" Darian hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window as another roll of thunder vibrated through the walls. "I know many things about you," he admitted, his tone careful, as if weighing how much to reveal. "More than you could imagine." The unease in Ilara's chest deepened, but so did her curiosity. There was something about him, something in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that stirred a feeling she couldn't quite place. It was as if he knew her, not just her name or her title, but something deeper, something that ran through her blood, through the very core of who she was. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice tight. "I don't even know who you are." Darian took another step closer, his presence filling the room in a way that made the air feel heavier, thicker. "I come from Valier," he said, his voice carrying a note of sorrow. "A world lost to darkness. My people, we are dying, Ilara. And you are the only one who can save us." Ilara stared at him, her mind racing. Valier. She had heard of the place in ancient stories, legends passed down from her ancestors about a distant world that had once been filled with light, much like Skyla. But those stories were centuries old, forgotten by all but a few scholars. How could this man be here now from a world that had been lost for so long? "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "Why me? Why now?" Darian's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ilara saw the vulnerability beneath the surface. "Because our worlds are connected," he said quietly. "Your power, your connection to the light of Skylay is the key to saving my people. The Oracle foretold it long ago." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The Oracle. She had heard whispers of such a figure, a mystical being who had the power to see beyond time and space, to know the future and the past. But those were myths, stories told to children, weren't they? "You're asking me to believe in legends," she said, her voice tinged with skepticism. "In prophecies and ancient connections that I've never even heard of." Darian's expression grew more serious, his gaze piercing. "It's not just a legend, Ilara. It's real. And if we don't act now, it will be too late." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak, and Ilara felt the stirrings of something she hadn't felt in a long time: fear. But it wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for her people, for the world she had sworn to protect. If what Darian said was true, then the stakes were far higher than she had ever imagined. Ilara took a deep breath, her mind racing through the possibilities, the risks. She had always trusted her instincts, her connection to the light of Skyla. But this was something far beyond her experience. And yet, as she looked into Darian's eyes, she felt the pull of something undeniable, something she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. Darian's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "We must bond," he said quietly. "Our energies must merge. It is the only way to restore the light to Valier." Ilara's heart raced, a mixture of fear and curiosity flooding her senses. She didn't fully understand what he was asking, but she knew one thing for certain: this was not a choice to be made lightly. It was a path that would change everything for her, for him, for their worlds. "Will I survive it?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Darian's gaze never wavered. "I will protect you," he promised. "I will be with you every step of the way." Ilara stared at him for a long moment, her mind whirling with questions, doubts, and fears. But deep down, beneath all the uncertainty, she felt the stirrings of something else: hope. Hope that, together, they could change the fate of not just their worlds, but perhaps even the universe itself. Finally, Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. "Then let's begin." As Darian took her hand, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling through the night like a chorus of forgotten souls. But inside, in the quiet of the observatory, a new storm was brewing, one that would forge a bond between two worlds and two souls that could never be broken. And as their energies began to merge, Ilara realized that this storm was only the beginning. The storm outside intensified, as though the sky itself had been torn open. Thunder rumbled through the city, vibrating through the walls of the observatory. The glass window panes trembled under the relentless assault of wind and rain, while flashes of lightning illuminated the darkened room in brief bursts of eerie light. Ilara stood frozen, her breath shallow, as the figure across the room stepped out of the shadows. His presence filled the air, heavy and unshakable, like the pressure before a great storm. The man, if he could even be called a man, was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, with broad shoulders and an air of quiet strength, he moved with a fluidity that belied his powerful frame, his steps silent despite the ferocity of the storm surrounding them. His clothes were simple but unfamiliar, soaked through with rain, clinging to his body like a second skin. But it was his eyes that held her in place. They were deep, dark pools, almost black, but flickering with faint glimmers of light and inner light, as though something alive and ancient stirred beneath the surface. His gaze was steady, intense, and when their eyes met, Ilara felt a jolt of energy pulse through her, a sensation that startled her into taking a step back. The air between them buzzed with an almost electric tension, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted in response to his arrival. "Who are you?" Ilara demanded, her voice steady but laced with a sharp edge. She was no stranger to unexpected encounters, but this was something entirely different. This man, this stranger, had appeared in her private sanctuary, seemingly from nowhere, and there was a presence about him that unsettled her deeply. The man's expression remained calm, but there was something unreadable in his gaze, a depth that hinted at things left unsaid. He took a slow step forward, and Ilara instinctively reached for the ceremonial dagger she kept hidden in the folds of her robe. She didn't draw it, but the cool weight of the blade in her hand gave her a small measure of comfort. "I mean you no harm," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a strange warmth despite the tension in the air. "My name is Darian Kale. I have come from a world far beyond this one, a place called Valier." The name sent a shiver down Ilara's spine, though she didn't immediately understand why. Valier. It was a name she had heard before, in passing, in the ancient texts of Skyla's archives. A world lost to time, a place that no longer existed if it ever had. Her pulse quickened as a faint memory stirred in the back of her mind, but she couldn't grasp it fully. "What do you want from me?" Ilara asked, her hand tightening around the dagger hilt. She kept her voice steady, though a flicker of unease settled in her chest. She was not one to be easily shaken, but the way this man looked at her as though he knew something she didn't unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Darian's eyes softened, though the intensity of his gaze never wavered. "I've come because I need your help," he said, his tone gentle but laced with urgency. "Valier is dying. My people, we are fading, lost to darkness. And you, Ilara, you are the key to saving us." Ilara blinked, her mind racing. It was as if the world had tilted slightly off its axis. The air seemed thicker, the storm outside more distant, as if her focus had narrowed down to the man standing before her. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but none of it made sense. How could she, a leader of Skyla, a world that had been isolated for centuries, be connected to a place she barely knew existed? The idea was absurd, impossible. And yet, deep down, a small voice whispered that perhaps it wasn't so impossible after all. "You've come to the wrong place," Ilara said, shaking her head, though her voice lacked the conviction she had intended. "Skyla has no quarrel with Valier. Whatever troubles your people face, it's not something I can fix." Darian's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, determination, maybe, or a quiet desperation. "It's not about fixing a quarrel," he said quietly. "It's about survival. My people are connected to yours, though you may not know it. Our fates are intertwined, written in the stars long before either of us were born." Ilara's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? How could our worlds be connected?" Darian took another step closer, and this time, Ilara felt the weight of his presence more acutely. He moved with the kind of grace and precision that only came from years of discipline, and his gaze never left hers, as though he were searching for something in her that only he could see. "Your world, Skyla, is a place of light," Darian explained, his voice measured. "It is sustained by an energy source unlike any other in the galaxy, an energy that is both powerful and fragile. The light of Skyla is unique, and it is the only thing that can reignite the fading energy of Valier." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. His words tugged at a distant memory, something her mother had once told her about Skyla's energy source, the lifeblood of their world. The light that powered their cities, that allowed them to float above the barren plains, was a gift, a mystery passed down through the ages. But no one knew its origin or why it was unique. Not even Ilara, who had inherited the title of Ardentis, understood the full extent of its power. She narrowed her eyes, her instincts flaring. "How do you know about Skyla's light?" Darian hesitated for the briefest of moments, and in that hesitation, Ilara saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was there, a crack in the calm exterior he presented. "Because the Oracle told me," he said softly. "She foretold this long ago. The bond between Skyla and Valier. And you are the vessel through which that bond will be fulfilled." Ilara's breath caught. The Oracle. The mere mention of that name sent a ripple of shock through her. The Oracle was a figure from Skyla's oldest legends, a being said to possess knowledge of the past, present, and future. But those stories were ancient, long forgotten by most, relegated to the realm of myth. For Darian to invoke the Oracle's name so casually, it unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. "You're asking me to believe in prophecies and legends," Ilara said, her voice laced with skepticism. "In forgotten bonds between worlds that no longer exist." Darian's gaze hardened, though there was no anger in his eyes, only a fierce resolve. "I'm not asking you to believe," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust what you feel." Ilara opened her mouth to protest, to push back against the absurdity of it all, but the words died in her throat. Because the truth was, she did feel something. Ever since Darian had appeared, ever since their eyes had met, there had been a pull, a connection that she couldn't explain. It was as though something deep within her had recognized him, recognized the bond he spoke of, even if her mind couldn't yet grasp it. And that scared her more than anything. Ilara took a step back, her hand still gripping the dagger hilt tightly. "This is madness," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't even know you. How can I possibly help you? How can I be the key to saving your people?" Darian didn't move, but his expression softened, his gaze filled with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. "Because you're not just the leader of Skyla," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You are the light. You are the bridge between our worlds." The air between them seemed to thicken, the storm outside fading into the background as Ilara stared at him, her mind reeling. None of this made sense. And yet, deep down, she knew that there was truth in his words. She had always felt different, always sensed that her connection to Skyla's light was more than just a responsibility, it was a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. But this? To be told that she was the key to saving an entire world, a world she had never even heard of, it was too much. "I need more than your word, Darian," she said, her voice hardening. "If you want me to trust you, to believe in this connection, then you need to show me proof." Darian nodded, as though he had expected this. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out a small, shimmering object. It was a crystal, no larger than the palm of his hand, glowing with a faint blue light. The moment Ilara's eyes fell on it, she felt a jolt of recognition. "This crystal," Darian said, holding it up for her to see, "was given to me by the Oracle. It holds the last remnants of Valier's light, and it is the key to unlocking the bond between our worlds." Ilara's gaze was fixed on the crystal, her breath catching in her throat. The light it emitted was familiar, painfully so. It was the same light she had seen every day of her life, the same light that powered Skyla's floating cities, the light that flowed through her very veins. How she whispered, her voice trembling. Darian stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because our worlds were once one," he said softly. "And now they must be united again." The storm raged on outside, but inside the observatory, the air was still, charged with the weight of the truth that had just been revealed. Ilara's mind whirled, torn between disbelief and the undeniable pull she felt toward this stranger, this man who had come to her from a dying world, carrying a piece of her own. "I can't do this alone," Darian said, his voice gentle but filled with urgency. "I need you, Ilara. Skyla needs you. And together we can restore the light that was lost." Ilara's heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew, deep down, that this was no longer a question of whether she believed him or not. The proof was in her hands, in the crystal that glowed with the light of both their worlds. But the path ahead was uncertain, dangerous. And once she took the first step, there would be no turning back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ilara looked up, her eyes meeting Darian's. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. Darian smiled, a small, sad smile, and for the first time since his arrival, Ilara saw the weight he carried, the burden of his people's survival resting on his shoulders. "We begin the ritual," he said quietly. "And we bring our worlds back together." And as the storm outside continued to howl, Ilara knew that the journey they were about to embark on would change everything for Skylia, for Valier, and for the two of them. The quiet hum of energy beneath the floating city of Elithra had always been a source of comfort for Ilara. She was tied to it in ways that only a few people in Skyla could understand. As the Ardentis, her connection to the city's energy had been a lifelong bond, a gift passed down from generation to generation, allowing her to channel and safeguard the light that powered their world. But now, as she walked beside Darian through the ancient corridors of the Citadel, her mind buzzed with confusion, the weight of his words pressing down on her like the dark, storm-filled sky outside. The rain was relentless, beating against the tall windows as if the storm itself was trying to break in. The air inside felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension that mirrored the atmosphere between her and the stranger who had appeared in her sanctuary only moments ago. Darian Kale, from the lost world of Valier, a place that shouldn't even exist, at least, not in the way he described. Yet, despite all her doubts, Ilara couldn't deny the feeling in her gut, the pull that had begun the moment Darian stepped into her life. There was something between them, something that went beyond words, beyond logic. Every instinct told her that the connection was real, as impossible as it seemed. They reached the heart chamber, the core of the floating city's energy network. Ilara paused at the entrance, her hand hovering just above the crystal door. Inside this chamber lay the source of Elithra's power, the ancient core that had sustained the city for centuries. The energy that flowed through the heart of Skyla was what kept their world alive, what made it possible for the floating cities to exist high above the barren plains below. Only she, as the Ardentis, had access to this chamber. No one else. Yeah, except now Darian was with her. I need to understand, she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. This connection you speak of, how can it be real? How can two worlds be connected in this way when we've been isolated for so long? Darian stood beside her, his dark eyes softening as he gazed at the door. The connection has always been there, he said quietly. It's just been hidden, buried deep within the fabric of our worlds. Our ancestors knew of it, but over time the knowledge was lost. My people, we forgot. And now, with valor fading, we've been forced to seek out the truth, to find the link that can restore our world. Ilara turned to him, her brow furrowed in thought. But how can I be the key? I've spent my entire life here on Skyla. I've never even heard of valor until tonight. Darian met her gaze, his expression earnest. The light that flows through you, Ilara, it's not just the light of Skyla, yeah, it's the light of valor too. You are a vessel for both worlds, even if you've never known it. Your ancestors, the original guardians of this city, were once part of something much larger. A network that connected the light of many worlds, including mine. That network was severed long ago, but now it's time to restore it. And you are the only one who can help me do that. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. His words stirred something deep inside her, a truth she hadn't known was there. She had always felt a sense of responsibility for Skyla, a bond with the light that powered their world, but she had never questioned where that light came from or why she had been chosen as its guardian. Could it be possible that her connection to the light went beyond Skyla? Beyond everything she had ever known? I need proof, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. I need to see it for myself. Darian nodded, his gaze filled with understanding. That's why we're here. With a deep breath, Ilara placed her hand on the crystal door. The surface was cool to the touch, but as soon as her skin made contact, the energy within the door flared to life, responding to her presence. A soft glow spread outward from her fingertips, and the door slid open with a quiet hum, revealing the heart chamber beyond. The chamber was bathed in soft, golden light, its walls lined with intricate patterns of energy that pulsed gently like a living heartbeat. At the center of the room, suspended in midair, was the core, a large, multifaceted crystal that shimmered with an internal light. It was the source of Elithra's power, the heart of the city's energy network. Ilara stepped inside, the familiar hum of the core vibrating through her bones. This was the place she had come to countless times, the place where she felt most connected to her world. But tonight, as she stood there with Darian by her side, the chamber felt different, charged with a new kind of energy, a deeper resonance that thrummed in the air. Darian followed her into the chamber, his eyes fixed on the core. For a long moment he said nothing, simply watching the light as it pulsed gently in the room. Then slowly he reached into his cloak and pulled out the small crystal he had shown her earlier, the one he had claimed was from valor. Ilara's breath caught as he held it out toward the core. The moment the two crystals came into proximity, something extraordinary happened. The core responded, its light flaring brighter, as though recognizing the presence of the smaller crystal. A low hum filled the chamber, the energy in the air intensifying. The two crystals pulsed in unison, their lights blending together in a soft, radiant glow. This, Darian said quietly, his voice filled with reverence, is the connection. Ilara stared at the crystals, her mind racing. The energy flowing between them was undeniable, a tangible bond that resonated in the very air. She could feel it deep within her, a pull that reached beyond the physical, beyond the walls of the chamber. It was as though a door had been opened, and behind it lay a vast network of energy, stretching out into the cosmos, connecting her world to something far greater than she had ever imagined. It's real, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The connection, it's real. Darian nodded, his eyes softening. It is. And now that we've found it, we can begin to restore what was lost. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step closer to the core, her gaze fixed on the two crystals as they pulsed in unison. The light from valor was different from the light of Skyla, softer, more fragile, but no less beautiful. It was as though the two energies were meant to be together, complementing each other, strengthening each other. But with that realization came a surge of fear. The responsibility of what they were about to do weighed heavily on her. This wasn't just about restoring valor, this was about rekindling a bond that had been severed long ago, a bond that connected their worlds in ways she could barely comprehend. If they failed, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for valor but for Skyla as well. What if we're wrong, she asked, her voice trembling. What if this connection is too fragile? What if? Darian reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. We won't fail, he said quietly. The light between our worlds is strong. It has survived for centuries, even when we forgot it existed. Now that we found it, we will nurture it. Together. Ilara stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The bond between them, the connection she had felt since the moment he arrived, was growing stronger, more tangible with every passing moment. It wasn't just about the light, it was about the two of them, about the way their energies seemed to complement each other, just like the crystals. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to trust in the pull she felt. She had always been taught to follow her instincts, to trust in the light that guided her. And now, standing in the heart chamber with Darian beside her, she knew that this was what she was meant to do. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady. Darian smiled, a small, relieved smile, and for the first time since he had arrived, Ilara saw the weight of his journey lifting from his shoulders. "We need to merge the lights," he said. "Your energy and mine, the light of Skyla and the light of Valier, they must become one." Ilara's heart raced as she looked up at the core, the soft glow of the two crystals pulsing in unison. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She had no idea what the outcome would be, but she knew that there was no turning back. Taking another deep breath, she stepped closer to the core, raising her hand toward the shimmering crystal. The moment her fingers made contact, the energy flared, bright and powerful, like a surge of electricity coursing through her body. Ilara gasped, her senses flooding with the intensity of the light. It was overwhelming, but not painful, just pure, radiant energy, more alive than anything she had ever felt before. Darian stepped beside her, his hand still holding the smaller crystal from Valier. As he brought it closer to the core, the light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until the entire chamber was bathed in its glow. The two crystals pulsed in perfect harmony, their energies blending together in a dazzling display of light. Ilara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the energy flowing through her, connecting her to Darian in a way that went beyond the physical. It was as though their souls were merging, becoming one with the light that surrounded them. She could feel his presence, steady and strong, guiding her through the storm of energy that surged around them. The connection between their worlds, between them, was complete. When Ilara opened her eyes, the chamber was quiet once more, the light from the core dimming to a soft glow. The crystals pulsed gently in unison, their energies now fully merged, a bond that could never be broken. Darian let out a breath, his expression filled with awe and relief. "We did it," he whispered. Ilara nodded, her heart still racing. "We did." But even as the connection solidified, she knew that this was only the beginning. The bond between their worlds had been restored, but the path ahead was still uncertain. There were dangers that lay beyond the horizon, forces that would seek to tear them apart. But for now, in this moment, they had found each other. And together, they would face whatever came next. The connection between their worlds and between them was stronger than ever. The chamber's air hung thick with the remnants of energy, the pulsing light of the merged crystals slowly fading into a steady, calming rhythm. Ilara stood at the heart of the room, her hands still resting on the core that pulsed gently beneath her fingers, like the soft beat of a distant drum. The power she had just felt, the merging of Skyla's light with the faint glow of Valier, still buzzed through her veins, leaving her both exhilarated and terrified. She could feel that the bond had been made, the connection between their worlds restored. But now, as the intense glow of the ritual dimmed and the quiet of the chamber settled over them, the weight of what had just happened began to press down on her. This was not a simple act of merging energies, this was something far greater, far more dangerous. With this bond came responsibility, an unspoken promise to protect not just Skyla, but a world she had never known, a world that had been lost in darkness for centuries. Darian stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the core, his expression filled with awe and quiet reverence. The light from Valier had been saved, reignited by their actions. But even as the triumph of the moment filled the air, Ilara couldn't shake the heavy sense of unease that lingered at the edges of her thoughts. She turned to him, her voice low. "It's done, but what happens now?" The question was quiet, but it held the weight of everything unsaid between them. Darian finally looked at her, his expression soft but serious. "Now we must make a choice, Ilara," he said, his voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "The connection has been restored, but it is fragile. The bond between Skyla and Valier has only just been reignited. It needs to be nurtured, strengthened, or it will fail. And if it fails," his voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "If it fails, Valier will fall." Ilara finished for him, the gravity of the situation sinking in. The light they had rekindled was more than just an energy source, it was life itself. Without it, Valier would be lost to darkness forever, its people doomed to extinction. Darian nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the chamber. "Yes, and that is why we must decide what comes next. This bond between our worlds, it's more than just a connection of light. It's a connection between us. And that bond, it comes with consequences. Ilara's heart skipped a beat at his words, the weight of their truth settling over her like a heavy cloak. Consequences. She had felt it the moment they began the ritual, the pull between them, the way their energies had merged so effortlessly, as if they were always meant to be one. But it wasn't just the light of Skyla and Valier that had merged. It was their own souls, their very beings. She had never believed in fate, in destiny. Her life had been defined by the choices she had made, by her determination to lead her people and protect the light that had sustained them for generations. But now, standing beside Darian in the quiet aftermath of the ritual, she felt as though her choices had been leading her to this moment all along. This bond, she said slowly, her voice trembling slightly, it's not just between our worlds, is it? Darian's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ilara saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the quiet uncertainty that mirrored her own. No, he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. It's between us. The Oracle foretold it long ago that the light of Valier would be restored not just by Skyla's energy, but by the union of two souls. Our connection, it was written in the stars long before we ever met. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Union. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about saving Valier, it was about something deeper, something more personal. She had felt the pull between them from the moment he had appeared, but she had never allowed herself to consider what it truly meant. Until now. Her heart raced as the truth of his words sank in. Their fates were intertwined, not just by the light of their worlds, but by something far greater, something neither of them had fully understood until this moment. The choice before them was no longer just about duty or responsibility. It was about their future, their lives. What if I can't do it? Ilara asked, her voice small, her doubts surfacing for the first time. What if I'm not strong enough to maintain this bond? What if I fail? Darian reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. His touch was warm, steady, grounding her in the midst of her uncertainty. You won't fail, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. You are stronger than you know, Ilara. You have carried the light of Skyla within you all your life. You are its guardian. And now you are also the guardian of Valier's light. Ilara stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the strength he saw in her. But the weight of what they were about to do felt overwhelming, impossible. You don't have to do this alone, Darian said, his voice gentle but firm. We are in this together. The bond between us, it's not just a burden to bear. It's a source of strength. Together we can protect both of our worlds. Together we can ensure that the light survives. His words filled her with a sense of calm she hadn't expected. It was true, they were not alone in this. The connection between them was real, and it was growing stronger with every passing moment. Ilara could feel it deep within her soul. The bond that had formed during the ritual was more than just a merging of energies, it was a merging of their very beings. And in that bond there was strength. But with that strength came the realization that this bond could not be undone. Whatever they chose now, it would shape the rest of their lives. There was no turning back. Taking a deep breath, Ilara met Darian's gaze, her eyes filled with determination. What do we need to do, she asked, her voice steady once more. Darian smiled, a small but genuine smile, as if he had been waiting for this moment. We must complete the bond, he said. The light between our worlds has been rekindled, but to ensure it remains strong, we must fully merge our energies. This union, it's not just about our worlds, Ilara. It's about us. Ilara's heart raced, her pulse quickening as the full weight of his words settled over her. This was the moment of decision, the choice that would define the rest of her life. She had always known her duty to Skyla, had always accepted the responsibility of protecting the light. But now she was being asked to go beyond that, to share her life, her power, with Darian in a way that went far deeper than any ritual. But even as the fear of the unknown gripped her, there was another feeling, a feeling of hope, of possibility. The bond between them was undeniable, and in her heart she knew that this was where she was meant to be, with him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ilara nodded, her decision made. I'm ready, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Let's finish this. Darian's smile widened, a look of relief and gratitude washing over his face. Together, then he whispered. Together they stood before the core, their hands clasped, their energies merging once more. The light between their worlds pulsed bright and steady, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And as the final step of their bond began, Ilara knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side, together. The heart chamber pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm, its soft glow casting gentle shadows across the walls. The crystalline core, suspended in the center of the room, shimmered faintly, like the heartbeat of the floating city itself. Ilara stood before it, her breath shallow, her heart racing. The enormity of what she and Darian were about to do weighed heavily on her, and though she had agreed to it, the fear of the unknown gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. Darian was by her side, his presence a constant, steadying force. He had been patient, explaining each step of the ritual that would bind their energies together, but now that the moment had arrived, the air between them felt thick with tension. This was no ordinary merging of powers, it was a union that would change everything, for both of them. The light of Scylla and the fading energy of Valor would merge, but so too would their lives, their fates. Ilara took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She had been the guardian of Scylla's light for as long as she could remember, trained to channel its power and protect the floating city from any harm. But this was different. This was not just about guarding the light, this was about sharing it, opening herself to something greater, something far beyond her control. Darian turned to her, his dark eyes soft but filled with determination. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle but steady. Ilara hesitated, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the core. The energy that flowed through it was familiar, comforting, but the thought of merging it with the unknown force from Valor sent a shiver of doubt through her. Yet when she looked into Darian's eyes, she saw the same weight of responsibility reflected back at her. He too was risking everything for his people, for a world that had been lost to darkness. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the chamber. It was a lie, in part. How could anyone be ready for something so monumental? But she knew that there was no turning back. The bond between their worlds had already begun to form, and this ritual was the final step to solidifying that connection. Darian nodded, his expression serious but calm. He stepped forward, raising the crystal from Valor in his hand. Its faint, flickering light seemed almost fragile compared to the steady glow of Scylla's core. He held it out toward her, and the moment the two energies came into close proximity, the air in the chamber shifted. The light from the core flared, bright and sudden, as if recognizing the presence of its counterpart. The energy between the two crystals crackled, a low hum vibrating through the room, and Ilara felt it deep within her bones, a pull, like a thread of light connecting her to Darian, pulling them toward each other. "The core will guide us," Darian said, his voice quiet but resonant. "Once the two energies are aligned, they will begin to merge. All we have to do is open ourselves to the light, let it flow through us." Ilara nodded, swallowing the lump of fear that had lodged itself in her throat. She stepped closer to the core, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hand hovered over its glowing surface, the energy beneath her fingertips buzzing with life. She could feel the light of Scylla responding to her presence, as it always did, but this time it was different. The core seemed to hum with anticipation, as though it knew what was about to happen. Darian mirrored her movements, his hand just above the surface of the core, his crystal held firmly in his grasp. "On my count," he said softly. 3, 2, 1. In unison, they touched the core. The moment their hands made contact with the crystal, a surge of energy exploded between them, bright and powerful. Ilara gasped, her breath catching in her throat as the light from both Scylla and Valor erupted into a blinding burst of color. It was overwhelming, a rush of warmth and power that coursed through her body like a river of molten light. She could feel Darian's presence, his energy merging with hers, their minds and souls intertwining in a way she had never imagined possible. The light surrounded them, enveloping them in its radiant glow. For a moment it felt as though they were suspended in time, caught in the flow of energy that connected their two worlds. Ilara's senses were flooded with sensations: warmth, light, the sound of distant whispers carried on the wind. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, as if she were standing at the edge of a great abyss, with no way to know what lay beyond. Breathed, Darian's voice echoed through the light, steady and calm. "Let the energy guide you. Don't fight it." Ilara struggled to steady her breathing, to calm the racing of her heart. The energy was so intense, so all-encompassing, that it was hard to focus. But as she took a deep breath, she began to relax, letting the light wash over her, allowing it to flow through her without resistance. Slowly, the chaotic surge of energy began to settle, the light softening around them, its rhythm becoming more gentle, more harmonious. The core pulsed beneath their hands, steady and reassuring. Ilara could feel the light of Scylla flowing into the crystal from Valor, merging with its energy, breathing life back into the fading glow of Darian's world. And at the same time, she could feel the energy from Valor seeping into her, blending with her own light, strengthening her connection to the core in a way that felt deeper, more profound than anything she had ever experienced before. The bond between them was complete. As the light began to fade, slowly receding back into the core, Ilara opened her eyes. The chamber was quiet once more, the soft hum of the crystals the only sound in the room. But everything felt different. She felt different. The energy that had flowed through her, through both of them, had left its mark. She could feel it deep within her, a new strength, a new connection that tied her not just to the light of Scylla, but to Darian, to Valier. Darian let out a slow breath, his hand still resting on the core. When he looked at her, his eyes were filled with quiet awe. "It's done," he whispered. Ilara nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "We did it." The light of their worlds had been merged. The bond between them solidified. And yet, as the final glow of the ritual dimmed, Ilara knew that their journey was far from over. This was just the beginning of their connection, of their shared fate. They had reignited the light, but now they had to protect it, nurture it, and ensure that it would survive the trials to come. Darian stepped closer, his gaze soft but filled with determination. "We've restored the light," he said, his voice steady but laced with the weight of responsibility. "But we'll have to fight to protect it. There are forces that will want to tear us apart, to destroy what we've just created." Ilara met his gaze, her heart swelling with both fear and hope. She knew he was right. The light they had rekindled was fragile, and there were those who would stop at nothing to control or destroy it. But she also knew that they were stronger together. The bond they had formed was more than just a merging of energies, it was a connection that went far deeper, a bond that would guide them through whatever darkness lay ahead. "We'll protect it," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Together. And as they stood before the core, their hands still intertwined, Ilara knew that they had set in motion a destiny that would change both of their worlds forever. The light of Scylla and Valier had been restored, and with it, the hope of a new future, one that they would face, side by side. The light from the heart chamber dimmed slowly, settling into a soft, steady glow as the energy stabilized. Ilara stood still, her hands slipping away from the crystalline core, her body humming with the after-effects of the ritual. The once frantic pulse of energy had now calmed, a rhythmic, gentle current that flowed through her like the beat of a second heart. It was done. The bond between Scylla and Valier was complete, but the full weight of what they had just accomplished, of what it truly meant, was only beginning to settle in. For a long moment, neither she nor Darian spoke. They simply stood there, bathed in the soft, golden light of the core, letting the reality of their shared connection sink in. Everything had changed. And yet, as the quiet of the chamber enveloped them, the world outside seemed untouched by the monumental shift that had just taken place. The storm still raged beyond the citadel walls, rain hammering against the windows, thunder rumbling like a distant heartbeat. But inside, the energy was peaceful, serene. It was as though the ritual had forged not only a bond between their worlds, but also a deep sense of calm within her. The uncertainty that had plagued Ilara before, her fear of failure, of the unknown, had faded, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose she hadn't felt in years. Darian turned to her, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he spoke. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "It's over, but somehow it feels like it's only just beginning." Ilara nodded, the weight of his words settling over her like a gentle cloak. "It is," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "This connection between us, between our worlds, it's only the start of something much bigger than either of us." The bond they had forged was more than just the merging of two energies. It was a promise, a link that tied their fates together in ways she still didn't fully understand. Ilara could feel the light of Valier inside her now, a faint but steady glow that mingled with the power of Scylla. It was a part of her, just as her own energy was now a part of Darian. They were no longer just two people standing in a chamber. They were connected on a level that transcended distance, time, and even their own individual identities. But with that connection came responsibility. The light they had restored, though powerful, was fragile, and there were forces beyond their world that would seek to claim it, to tear it apart. Their union had saved Valier from the brink of extinction, but the struggle was far from over. Darian stepped closer, his presence grounding her in the midst of her swirling thoughts. "You've given my people hope," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "I can feel it, the light of Valier is no longer fading. It's growing stronger, and it's because of you. Because of us." Ilara's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and a deep, quiet affection for the man standing beside her. Darian had risked everything to come here, to trust her, to place his world's survival in her hands. And now they had succeeded. But this was only the beginning of their journey. "We've done something incredible," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "But there's still so much we don't know. About the light, about what happens next." Darian nodded, his expression serious. The Oracle's vision didn't end with this ritual. She spoke of challenges to come, of forces that would seek to undo everything we've accomplished. There are those who would see the light of Valier and Skyla as a threat. They will come for us. Ilara's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. Then we faced them together. Darian's gaze softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. He smiled, a small, almost shy smile that made something inside her chest tighten. Together, he echoed. They stood in silence for a while, the rhythmic hum of the core the only sound in the room. Ilara could feel the energy still flowing between them, the quiet strength of their connection. It was strange and new, but it wasn't frightening. In fact, it felt right, as though this was what she had been moving toward her entire life. All the years spent guarding Skyla's light, all the sacrifices, all the moments of doubt they had led her here, to this bond, to this new beginning. At last, Darian broke the silence. "We should return to the council," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "They'll want to know what's happened, and we'll need their help to prepare for what's coming." Ilara nodded, though part of her was reluctant to leave the quiet sanctuary of the chamber. Here, in the soft glow of the core, everything felt clear, simple. But the world outside was far from simple. And as much as she wanted to hold on to this moment, she knew that they couldn't stay here forever. With a final glance at the core, she turned and began to walk toward the chamber's exit. Darian followed, his presence steady and reassuring beside her. As they stepped out into the corridor, the sounds of the storm intensified, a reminder of the world that still raged beyond the citadel's walls. But even as the wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows, Ilara felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead would be difficult. There would be enemies, challenges, and dangers that they couldn't yet foresee, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She and Darian were bound together now, not just by duty, but by something far deeper. As they made their way through the citadel, the weight of their shared destiny settled over them, but it wasn't a burden. It was a promise to protect the light they had rekindled, to stand together against whatever forces would come for them. The bond between Skyla and Valier had been restored, but it was their bond, their connection, that would ensure its survival. And as they stepped into the gathering hall where the council awaited, Ilara knew that this was the beginning of something far greater than either of them had ever imagined. A new beginning, forged in light, in trust, and in the shared hope of a future that would unite their worlds forever.